use the Marshall Islands for nuclear weapons.
Can you explain what COFA is?
That's always the case.
Describe what that is.
These are things that we would expect the United States to know.
Thank you to our special guest, Benetick Kabua Maddison, for joining us on this very special episode of MEI, the podcast.
Yahweh, and welcome to episode 2 of MEI, the podcast. We're your hosts, Marcina, Langrine.
And I'm Matthew John, project specialist at MEI, a nonprofit based in Springdale, Arkansas. We're very excited to introduce to you all a very special guest, Benetick Kabua Maddison. Benetick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Very grateful to have you on the show. Benetick is the executive director at MEI in Springdale, Arkansas, where the highest concentration of Marshallese reside in the United States. Born on Medito Atoll in the Marshall Islands, Maddison migrated with his family to Arkansas at the age of 6. In part, due to increased flooding from rising seas, Maddison coordinates MEI programming focused on raising awareness of the nuclear testing legacy and climate change, raising educational attainment levels among Marshallese youth, and educating about Marshallese traditional culture. He speaks regularly at the United Nations on nuclear issues and advocates for other nuclear frontline communities, and is working with representatives from the Human Rights Council to identify and address needs of the Marshallese and diaspora as part of a larger project to address nuclear justice issues. Benetick, we are so excited to speak with you today. Glad to have you here. And how have you been this year so far?
This year I've been doing good, keeping busy with work as usual.
You moved to the United States at the age of 6. Can you describe what our homeland looks like and where it's located?
So the Marshall Islands are located North Central Pacific. Usually we have people say it's in the South Pacific. The islands are, lush green forest, if you may, blue turquoise waters, sandy beaches. It's warm all year round.
And Benetick, do you have any recollections of your favorite childhood memories back when you were in the RMI?
Yeah, one favorite recollection would be me and my grandfather. We would, at night, go outside and lie on this table, look up at the sky, stargazing.
Mm-hmm.
It's been 22 years since you've returned back to the islands. What differences did you notice when you went back as opposed to when you were a child? Was it more modernized? Were people more inside than outside? Were they using technology rather than playing outside and stuff?
Honestly, some of the people that were very close to me are no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
So grandparents, great-grandparents, extended family members. Looking back, I think there are a lot more people in the islands versus today, where we now have 2/3 of the Marshallese population living outside of the Marshall Islands.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things that I noticed going back when I stepped off of the plane was the humidity. And that's something that always gets people, is how hot it is. And I don't remember the islands being that humid when I used to live there. But in terms of development, I think the islands are still the same. Development is, of course, slow. There's much that can still be done. But really, we're going at the pace that the Marshall Islands can handle.
Mm-hmm. As a COFA resident living in the U.S., what are the types of challenges you've had to face while living here? And before you answer that, could you explain what COFA is?
So the Compact of Free Association is the bilateral agreement between the United States and the Marshall Islands. This agreement was signed in 1986, about 6 or 7 years after the Marshall Islands declared itself an independent nation, after approving its constitution in 1979.
Mm-hmm.
But because we were still under the United States at the time, the U.S. did not want to recognize our independence until we signed the compact in 1986.
Mm-hmm.
But this agreement, it allows Marshallese to move to the United States for employment, education, health, other reasons that would attract our people to move here to the States.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been renewed 2 times. The first one was in 2003, and the recent one was in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And it became effective in May of last year.
Mm-hmm. And as a COFA resident living in the U.S., what are the types of challenges you've had to face?
I think when I first moved here to the US, one of the challenges that I faced was language barrier
Mm.
and having to transition to this life that's obviously different from our way of life in the islands.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took a while for me to pick up on English, but also trying to adjust to life here in the States.
Right, yeah.
And, that's always the case with a lot of Marshallese families who have never been to the US.
Mm-hmm. It's like a huge culture shock, especially since you have food just in your backyard in the ocean, and then you got a McDonald's down the street, Walmart down the street. It's like completely different shift. What other types of challenges have you had while you were traveling? Are there issues with that?
I think one that I could point out is the fact that not a lot of people know about the Marshall Islands, or the fact that we have a passport. And so oftentimes, especially when I'm coming in from the East, from Europe, I'm often stopped and questioned and asked, do you have a visa? These are things that we would expect the United States to know.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, not a lot of people are aware.
Yeah.
And so, it's different. It's a different case when you're coming in from the West, because it's the Marshall Islands on the other side. People come through Hawaii, through California. Folks at those airports are used to seeing our passports.
Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. Especially since we all just came back from an Antigua trip, and we had a band member got stopped in Antigua because they didn't know what his passport was. So we didn't know if we were getting our guy back. We were about to go up there with 2 guys. But yeah, very frustrating experience, scary, especially to get stopped in like a completely different country that you have no idea like how to live, how to speak the native language. Like it can be very complicated.
Now with this compact, is there any efforts into, translating that into the Marshallese language, especially because this compact is very, intricate, very detailed. And I'm sure our folks, our people from the Marshall Islands, like they would want to know and understand what this compact entails. And so is there any efforts in translating this compact?
So one of our goals at MEI is to ensure that the compact is translated at some point. I mean, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, for example, has been translated into Marshallese. And so if we're able to translate that, we should be able to translate the compact and other useful resources or information that are important for our community, for our people to know.
Now, this treaty prohibition of nuclear weapons, can you describe what that is to the audience?
So the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, we often call it TPNW. That's a international treaty that is recognized by more than 122 countries around the world to, 1, abolish nuclear weapons, and 2, provide some form of compensation for nuclear frontline communities. For our organization, we not only want to abolish nuclear weapons, but use our nuclear legacy as an example to say this is what's going to happen if nuclear weapons are used. The ongoing health, environmental impacts that our communities continue to face. We don't want other communities or nations to have to go through the same burden.
And I'm sure a lot of this work, and just talking about the TPNW, that requires a lot of traveling and, discussions with different countries and the team presenting in different countries as well. And so I kind of just want to go back to the beginning of it all. So you've been involved with MEI since 2013. Can you tell our audience, how you got involved and what projects you were working on back then?
So I was initially invited to speak at Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day 2014 at the Clinton Presidential Library. And they asked me to speak on behalf of Marshallese youth, provide my perspective on the twin existential threats of nuclear and climate. And from there, I was then asked to help with a Marshallese oral history project where it was me and maybe 2 or 3 other Marshallese in our community. We got to interview Marshallese elders, community members about the culture, the history, life here in the U.S. and back home.
Mm-hmm.
And these interviews can actually be found on Vimeo through our website, mei.ngo. And some of the people that we interviewed back then are no longer with us. Mm-hmm. But we're grateful and honored to have sat down with them and, gained the knowledge that we got from them back then, so that we're able to share these stories with our generation and generations to come. Mm-hmm. From there, I became a full-time staff as education coordinator. My job was pretty much to help Marshallese youth, especially high school students, further their education. So I did workshops, assisted with scholarships, college applications, connecting them to other resources. From there, I served in different capacities throughout my time at MEI. I actually left MEI for a short period of time from, I think, 2016 up until 2019. Mm-hmm. Summer of 2019, I came back and I was the project specialist for youth, climate, and nuclear issues. So pretty much what I was already, what I did in the past. And from there, I became assistant director. And then in 2022, became the executive director here at MEI.
Yeah, going back to the digital archives, I think it's important to highlight that, a lot of the Marshallese history is not, in textbooks. And so I find it really amazing and important that MEI was able to catch these stories and store them in a digital archive. And I love that it's, accessible to the community to watch and listen to. And so, in addition to that, can you, describe the different types of programs and services that MEI offers? And, are these services only accessible to those residing in the state of Arkansas, or are they available to anyone outside of the state?
We have a lot of programs and services at MEI. To name a few, one would be the women's program, which focus a lot on domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, many issues that our community has been facing for decades. We also have programming for youth and elders, where we bring them together so that the young ones can learn from the elders about the culture, the history, the language, and we also have the language access program. Right now, a lot of it is translation and interpretation services, but we've also added a certification program or piece of that language access program. And that's to certify Marshallese to become interpreters here, not only in Arkansas, but in other states. And so really, a lot of our programs and services are geared towards the Marshallese residents of Arkansas. But we've had, Marshallese from other states contact us asking help with translation, with interpretation, and outreach.
Does MEI offer cultural competency or professional development classes to the community?
Yeah, so we have intercultural competency classes for businesses, for hospitals and clinics, and professional development classes for educators. And again, these opportunities are not just for people here in Arkansas, but we've had people contact us from other states. Like, for example, the professional development class. We've done one up in Washington State.
Given that MEI started at such a small space and a little office area, from your perspective, what has the growth of MEI been like since a small building back in 2014 to now a worldwide traveling organization tackling different humanitarian issues?
We've come a long way. I started off in a space that was smaller than this room, a cubicle. And so I didn't enjoy it very much, especially since I was by myself for the most part. But, seeing the growth here at MEI with more team members, bigger space for the organization to do all these different programs and services really is a success story. And, oftentimes when organizations start off, it's very difficult because then you have to find the resources. You also have to start off with yourself or with someone else next to you to help. And so really in the beginning, as far as staff, that was me, April, and just a few others. And now we have 15 people on our team, not just based here in Arkansas, but we've got people in other states and in the Marshall Islands. And we now have a functioning board, which was something that we didn't really have back then. But to have a board that's able to provide support and advice, I think for me, that's, again, that shows how much we've grown. And then the work we do. Again, we started off with helping community members with scholarships and college applications to now being a organization that is known at the international level. An organization that used to focus on local issues, but now we're focused on global issues and trying to address issues that, again, relates back to the nuclear legacy, which, as you all know, is the foundation of the work that we do here at MEI.
And you were appointed ED back in summer of 2022, which is right around the time when I started working here. So I didn't know what previous EDs, how they functioned or how they operated things. So I just want to know, what has it been like taking on that role of leadership? Do you feel more pressure now ever since you've taken that role?
I mean, honestly, it's a lot of thinking and trying to plan ahead. And so this job really entails just me sitting in my space, trying to figure out what are we going to do next month? What are we going to do in the summer?
Yeah, so basically like building from the ground up, basically, when you're planning things, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're building from scratch. It can be difficult, but the difference that I see between me and my predecessors is that my predecessors did not have this kind of support. And with support, I'm talking about the team that I have now. Back then, it was the executive director, and then me, and then maybe one or two other people. But now you have, people focused on, GBV, or people focused on youth, elders, and other programs and services in the organization.
And I find that encouraging, having a team, up beside you and, building those plans from scratch into fruition. And so it's really exciting to know that you have such a great team. We know that you've given statements at the UN or United Nations, numerous of times. Can you describe to the audience, what these speeches entail and what is the importance of amplifying our voices? And so I guess you can probably go to more depth about our nuclear legacy program.
So in terms of the nuclear legacy, again, it's something that MEI has always been doing since its establishment. And it was until about maybe around 2020, we were then involved with nuclear disarmament. And that's the work of trying to abolish nuclear weapons. Prior to that, it was always about raising awareness, bringing attention to the nuclear legacy. because we often get asked, why are Marshallese here in Arkansas or the United States? And so you want to start from that point to say, well, the United States used the Marshall Islands for nuclear weapons testing, and then came about the compact, which allowed Marshallese to migrate to the United States. And so earlier I had mentioned that the nuclear legacy is the foundation of the work that we do here at MEI. Because if we're working on health, that's also nuclear legacy. If you're working on education, that's also nuclear legacy. And so everything that we do here, one way or another, connects back to this legacy. And really, MEI, we're trying to address some of these nuclear related issues. Of course, these issues are very complex, but the ones that we can address, we're trying to do that right now with the programs or services that we have. And so that's why it's very important that we continue to be involved with raising awareness about the nuclear legacy. And then also trying to abolish nuclear weapons. Because again, we all know the impact of these weapons of mass destruction and how it impacts so many aspects of our community.
What does nuclear justice and climate justice mean to you? And what are your hopes for the younger generations who may one day follow in your footsteps of advocacy?
For me, how I see nuclear justice or climate justice is our people going back to a nation that is developed, that has opportunities, and communities that were forced to relocate because of nuclear testing, having the ability to return back to their homelands. And, we come here to the United States for these opportunities that may or may not exist in the Marshall Islands. We continue to see a lot of our people move here to the U.S. year after year. And the latest census showed that our population dropped by more than 25% in the Marshall Islands. And so obviously for me, justice is seeing these opportunities that people seek here in the U.S. exist back home. So a nation that is developed and has a lot of opportunities for our people, and where our nuclear issues are addressed, where we're able to address the issues of climate change. And so it's a very broad answer. It's complex looking at it, but that's the kind of justice that I would like to see. Not just nuclear compensation. Our people going back to a place where they have a job, where we have world-class hospitals, education system, public transportation. The list goes on and on and on. And then as far as the younger generation, I've had parents reach out to me saying, hey, my child wants to be like you when they grow up, to raise awareness about the nuclear legacy. To hear that, it's a good feeling. And for me, I want to make sure that this knowledge, this activism continues with the next generation, with our nieces and nephews, our future kids, grandkids, because it's not like we're the first Marshallese generation to talk about these nuclear issues. We look back in time, we look at people like Tony DeBroom, Darlene Keju, and so many others. They're no longer with us, but their spirit, their passion, it lives on through us. And although this work, especially raising awareness about the nuclear legacy, can be traumatic, it's important that it happens. It's important that we pass it down to the next storytellers, the next activists, the next generation of Marshallese.
Yeah, I find that, the use of storytelling and, using our, singing our songs, doing our chants, like I feel, and sharing those with the world, I feel like those are really strong forms of activism. And with the youth, they truly are the leaders of tomorrow. And it's so important that we continue to amplify the youth voices. So what are different ways that MEI is, working with the youth so that their voices, can be shared with the world?
So we have done workshops with young people, high schoolers, college students, and not just here in our community, but around the world. We've held workshops in Japan, in Geneva, Switzerland, to bring attention again to these issues that stems from the nuclear legacy. And young people have made paintings. We've done poem. We also have musicians like Mark Harmony that highlights these issues. And so those are some of the opportunities that we have for young people.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that we can continue to have these workshops, do more of it this year, especially with our own community.
Do you think there will be opportunities where MEI is able to? I know that MEI works really closely with the youth, but what about working with the older generation, and talking about the nuclear legacy? Do you think that, they would be receptive to it, or?
I mean, all of us are still learning,
Mm-hmm.
and there is still a lot out there that has yet to be known. In a recent report that I read by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, a report focused on the impact of nuclear weapons testing on Marshallese human rights. It showed that there are probably anywhere between, I think, 60 to 80 million documents relating to the nuclear testing program in the Marshall Islands. And so obviously there's a lot that we have yet to learn. And, the adults themselves, the older generation, I'm sure they want to know. And I mean, after all, they're also victims and survivors. And as victims and survivors, we have the right to know the impact that these weapons had and continues to have on us, our culture, our islands, and then our bodies.
These documents that you talk about, are these accessible or are they redacted?
That's a good question. Honestly, I don't know if they are accessible. I do know that documents that have been released are redacted. I can think about, so back in 2015, I went to Washington, D.C. with April to look at some of the declassified documents that were given to the Marshall Islands government. We went to the Marshall Islands Embassy in D.C. And as we were looking through these boxes of documents relating to the nuclear legacy, we saw that a lot of it was redacted. And so I wouldn't be surprised if, the 60 to 80 million documents were declassified. We would see the same thing, is millions of pages being redacted.
I do want to touch up on climate change. Now, the Marshall Islands are 2 meters above sea level. What efforts are, the Marshall Islands, or what is MEI doing with the youth today to, raise awareness about climate change?
So when we talk about the nuclear legacy, it's always important to talk about the climate crisis. You cannot separate those two topics from each other. And when we link those two issues up, oftentimes we talk about the Renner Dome. The Renner Dome holds 3.1 million cubic feet of nuclear debris that's obviously dangerous to the health of the environment and to people. But we've been warned that if this structure were underwater, it would break open and release all of its content. And so that's an issue that we have to think about, especially the Marshallese government, and especially those who live on Enuila, because they're not too far from this structure. And considering that the country is on average 2 meters above sea level, there's a possibility that we may lose our islands. They may submerge under the water within our lifetime. And yet we're only responsible for a very small amount of the greenhouse emission. And yet we'll be the first to really feel or lose our homelands.
Going back on the Runit Dome, the debris is from, the testing, but also plutonium that was flown in from the United States, correct?
Yeah, so there was plutonium that was transported from the indigenous lands of the Shoshone Nation all the way to Enuila. And according to experts, the waste was dumped into the lagoon.
That's hard to, to even think about, I think what's important is that, not only did these weapons of mass destruction, really destroy our homelands, but also all of Pacifica, and then also other frontline nuclear communities such as like the Shoshone Nation. And I really I really do applaud MEI for not only highlighting what happened in the Marshall Islands, but also all of the nuclear frontline communities. And so I think that's really important.
Given that we just got done talking about all of these issues, climate, nuclear, and your perspectives, going back to MEI, what do you think MEI would look like in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I hope that the programs and services that we have now will continue to exist, and hopefully we can add more to that list and have a bigger space, more people on our team as we continue to grow, just like we've seen the past almost 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that concludes our second episode with Benetick today. Benetick, before we head out, is there any additional comments that you would like to announce to the audience?
Well, first, thank you for, again, the opportunity to be on the show. And as far as future events that are coming up, we do have Youth May Day that we are hosting on May 10th.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also part of the May Day committee for the bigger celebrations at the end of May. But those are right now the biggest events we're focused on right now. There's more coming up in the future, but maybe we can save those for the next episodes.
Mm-hmm.
But again, thank you.
And for our audience, we will be dropping the links for Youth May Day. If anyone wants to participate in Youth May Day, we will drop those links for you.
Well, that is all we have for today. Thank you to our special guest, Benetick Kabua Maddison, for joining us on this very special episode of MEI the Podcast. We're your hosts, Matthew and Marcina. And as always, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.